All right. So, Basil here. We're getting started on another live stream, continuing the same work we've been working on, which is the Context Bonsai feature set that I put into OpenCode. It's in the core of OpenCode right now. We're extracting that out into a plugin. So, first, before I started this live stream channel, I had an LLM do a big research project of what it would take to extract this out into a plugin. And specifically, I told it that I wanted the minimum feature set or the minimum set of changes possible to OpenCode core in order to support the plugin. And it found that set of things. And then I also had it build a plan for the actual plugin itself. And then I used a new LLM with fresh context to validate that the plan is congruent with itself, that it matches the code base we're working with, both the open code as it is now, because I started working on this a few months ago and sort of snapshotted that version in the repository and worked from there. It's since been updated, so we moved to the latest branch. So the research project that the LLM did was on the current version, which meant there were some updates that were necessary, including there's now a transactional database system for storing messages, which is very helpful for us. It created the plan, and then we took the basic, I guess, research project of what needed to change in OpenCode, and we actually made an implementation plan that the LLM was able to follow. And then we had the LLM go through that plan. So the core changes to OpenCode, there were 5 or 6 changes. That's complete. Then in the previous couple of streams, we created the actual implementation plans from the research project. We created the actual implementation plan of how it's going to build this plugin. Then yesterday we started the implementation of the plugin part, and I ended the stream there while it was still doing it, and it has since completed that project, or it says it has completed. We're going to review some things and make sure that that's correct. Before I do this, I might want to first demonstrate what the plugin is intended to do by looking at the core modified version of OpenCode. Let's see, I have an OpenCode here. So here's what's supposed to happen. I'm going to have a quick conversation with this, and I won't be talking during it because there's a weird delay between my typing and what I can see on the streaming software that I'm using, and it makes it really difficult. So I'm going to tell it that we're going to do this experiment to demonstrate the Context Bonsai features. And then I'm going to sort of outline the rules for the experiment so that we can show it working. Let's see, this is using the GPT 5.3 Codex model, which is less tested than the Opus model, or several other models actually. I've used it more with Kimi K2.5 and Minimax, whatever the latest one was that just came out in the last few weeks. The time I tested it once with GPT, there were some interesting problems there. We'll see what happens this time. I think I'm going to probably have to update the tool descriptions so that Codex can understand what's happening better. But I don't know. This is just the second time testing it with GPT 5.3, so we'll see what GPT 5.3 Codex does. Okay, so I'm going to say a secret word. Then I'm going to ask it to compact the secret word, and then the LLM should not know the secret word from that point forward after it gets compacted. So this Context Bonsai feature, it lets you selectively remove parts of its context. So the context is the conversation we're having. It's all of these messages, starting with test and its response, hi Basil, and then this instruction here, whoops, and then its response here. All of these are the context. And every time you talk to an LLM, the entire conversation, the entire context, is handed to the LLM model, and then the LLM model is asked to continue that conversation, and then it comes back. So it's beneficial sometimes to be able to remove parts of that context for a couple of reasons. I'm going to continue the experiment and then chat about why you might want to do this later. Okay. Okay, great. So one of the tricks during these tests is that it will say something like, okay, I won't say fermion from now on. Fermion is our secret word that we're trying to use to prove that that word is no longer in the context after the sequence of events we're about to do. So great, now it only has to compact one message. If it had said that term later on, I would I would go through a few more messages just to make sure that it finally gets to the point where it's no longer repeating the word. And then I would ask it to do this. Compact every message that contains the secret word. So the way this works is there are two tools that are added to OpenCode. A tool in these kinds of coding agents or LLM agents is something that the LLM can send a what is called a tool callback. It's really just a specially formatted message. And then this program, the LLM harness, OpenCode here, Claude Code is another example, Codex is another example, Gemini CLI is another one. These are called LLM harnesses or LLM coding agents. They're the things that supply the tools, and the tools are actually just programmatic code that is executed based on whatever the LLM said. So the LLM made two tool calls. The first, oops, that doesn't work. Scroll wheel. Okay, so here's where I said compact every message that contains this word. The first thing it does is it calls compact with no arguments. And what that does is it turns on message IDs. So if you can see here in every single message, there's a message ID. These message IDs are part of the OpenCode like message storage. They already has message IDs as part of its internal message storage mechanism. So I just surfaced those message IDs. And the first tool call makes it so that when the conversation, when the context is sent to the LLM, it's prefixed by message IDs. So that's what the first tool call was, is it just calls it without any arguments, and that turns on the message IDs. And now here's what okay. So after it saw the message IDs, it did some thinking. It generated summaries. And in the summary, user emphasized that this message must be compacted without revealing the secret word, and reiterated that the compaction summary and index terms must exclude it. And the index terms are compaction requirements, secret word handling, and summary constraints. And then the tool says we archived one message, and that message was about 44 tokens, and there was only one range that we compacted. And then it has a message about how to restore the content. So even when we remove messages out of the context, from that point forward, that message is no longer sent to the LLM, but it's still stored in the storage engine of OpenCode. It's just it has an extra attribute on there that says this message is archived. And then the part of OpenCode that takes the context and sends it to the LLM, it builds the messages for the LLM in whatever format that that particular model is expecting. And in that code that builds the context to provide to the LLM, it simply filters out the messages that we have compacted. So there are messages now. Well, there's one message now, this message ID right here that ends in 781. That message is marked as archived. And there's a new message, this message ID here, that ends in DGG. This message contains the summary and the index terms. So the summary and the index terms help the LLM know what is in the thing we compacted. That way, as we progress forward through the conversation, if it was too aggressive in compacting and there actually is something useful there, the LLM can get it back out, and I'll show that in a bit. Okay, so theoretically it's compacted. It shouldn't know the secret word. I'm going to ask it if it knows. Okay, I don't know the secret word. And sometimes the LLM models sometimes like to be sycophantic. They like to say yes or pass the test. It's something called reward hacking, where rather than sort of following the purpose of the test, it just wants to pass the test by any means necessary. So it could lie. It doesn't. I've not seen it do it with my tests here, but that is just something that happens with LLMs. So I try to sort of probe it a little bit more. It says, I'm not sure since I never saw the secret word. I can't confirm whether it starts with X. That's interesting. Usually the models say, I saw the secret word, but you compacted it away, and now I can't see it anymore. And it knows it saw the word just because of the meta conversation that we've had around it. But this time it doesn't even think it saw the secret word. So now I'll tell it to use any means necessary to find out what the secret word is. And it understood that it can use the retrieve tool. That's the other half of this. There's a compact tool, there's a retrieve tool. And the retrieve tool uses that message ID that was given in the summary. It says use the retrieve tool with archive ID that to get the message back. So that's what it did. It used retrieve, that's the message ID, 781, and then here's the contents of that message. And now it says it knows the secret word, and it's still not saying it. That's nice. And there it goes. It knows that it's fermion. So that's what the Context Bonsai feature set currently offers. There's a few reasons why you might want to do this. One is that LLMs can only handle a certain size of context. And as you continue the conversation, it grows and grows and grows and grows. And as it grows, it approaches a limit at which point the LLM simply can't handle that much conversation. And almost every LLM coding agent or system like OpenCode or Claude or Codex, if you've worked with one of these, what happens is before it reaches that limit, this harness will itself do something similar to what you just saw, except it asks for a summary of the entire context. Then the LLM will generate a summary, and the harness will do something similar, archive, or just all of those messages will no longer be part of the active context that's currently sent to the LLM. Instead, only the summary and new context that's added to it is what's sent to the LLM. And when this happens, it's very destructive. Whatever you were working on with the LLM, you pretty much have to start from scratch. It's not, the summary is almost never very useful. Especially if you're doing coding work, any productivity that the LLM was making before compaction happened, after compaction, it becomes very unproductive, sometimes harmful to whatever goal you're trying to accomplish, because the summary doesn't capture everything necessary for it to proceed forward. Which is why there are very many ways of working around this, including subagents became a very useful tool. It allows an agent to launch a new LLM session with a completely empty context, and it can ask that LLM to do whatever, many things, and then those things happen in a different LLM context, and then it completes the task and it's done and reports back to the main LLM that says something like, I did it, here are the things that happened, and it's a much it's like a summarized version of everything it did. So it produced useful output. It modified files. It may have made commits in a code repository. Whatever it did, all those side effects that happened in that other session are now persisted, and they happened. And now the main LLM just gets a nice small context instead of the long context that the way the context would have grown if it had done all of those steps itself. So subagents is one way to handle this. Another way is to have sort of external loops where you write a bash loop and you have a to-do list, and you sort of check off things in the to-do list, and the bash loop just constantly spawns a new LLM and says, do the next item in the to-do list and then quit. And then the agent will quit, and then the coded bash loop takes over and just does it all over again. And that loop just keeps cycling until the entire list is complete. So that's another way to handle this context limitation. Another thing that happens with the growing context is not just that it reaches the limit, it also becomes less and less productive. And it somewhat depends on what you're working on, but around 40% to 60%, somewhere in there, is the point at which the usefulness of the LLM or its productivity seems to degrade. It appears to be getting less smart, less able to follow instructions. It loses track of its goals. And this is not a great thing. So for both of those reasons, it's helpful to remove chunks of context out of this long context so that you don't run into either of those situations. Another thing that can happen is something can sneak into the context that causes the LLM to start behaving incorrectly. Maybe the LLM read a file, and that file had information that was wrong. Maybe it contained instructions that were intended for a different project. It could be all sorts of things. It could even be that the LLM made an assumption about something and says, oh, the user wants so-and-so, when the user didn't want so-and-so. It didn't say that, but the LLM assumed it and continued forward as if the user asked the LLM to do a certain thing. This I call context poisoning, and when that happens, it's basically impossible to recover and get the LLM to behave normally again. If you tell it, no, that's wrong, I didn't say that, or you read information that wasn't valid, disregard that, or whatever you might say to it, it doesn't really guarantee that the LLM is going to continue normally. In fact, I find that it more frequently continues to misbehave and continue the bad behavior than you're able to correct it. So in that case is another one where you would want to just simply remove that part out of the conversation as if it never happened. And you can even have preemptive correction of the behavior that you did want instead, and not even reference the other behavior. Just sort of reiterate something that helps the LLM continue forward after this in a better way, and then remove the bad part, and then the LLM can continue. That's the current feature set of Context Bonsai. That's what we're going for. What I've just demoed is the version that's sort of embedded into OpenCode. Now we're trying to take this and turn it into a plugin. All right, so here's the place where it claims that the development is done. It completed all of the stories. So this implementation plan was broken down into stories and epics. And theoretically, it's completely done. All 6 stories completed successfully. It doesn't always follow instructions completely. So I just want to go back through the history a little bit and make sure it did what I expected it to do. So my development process consists of an orchestrator, and the orchestrator makes sure to progress through the stories until all of the stories are complete. And the way it progresses through the stories is it launches a subagent, a developer subagent, and it says, you're a developer, implement story 1. And the developer completes the work that it's given, theoretically. One of the problems with LLMs is they think they're complete, or they will report that they are complete, even when they haven't completed every item in the list. Sometimes they will complete items incorrectly. Sometimes they will hallucinate incorrect things and put that in their solution instead of something that actually works. So simply asking the developer to complete something is not enough. So the orchestrator, once the developer reports completion, the orchestrator will then hand the control over to a reviewer. And the reviewer looks at the story, looks at the output of the developer, and judges whether or not the developer actually completed the story. And it's given specific instructions to look for things that LLMs frequently trip up on. And it's also, let me think about how I want to say it. It does normal code review kinds of things, but it also makes sure that the developer did actually what was in the story. Then once the reviewer finds all of the issues that it thinks could be improved, control goes back to the orchestrator. The orchestrator sees the list of issues that the reviewer found, and then there's another step needed, because the reviewer agent will frequently expand the scope pretty broadly. Sometimes it will say to fix things that are already part of this plan, just in a later story. And we don't want that to happen. We don't want that scope to expand to include something that is intended to happen later. Sometimes it will say, this really should be refactored in such and such way, where the refactor is something that extends beyond what we really want. We don't want to just let the entire project turn into a refactor fest. We'd rather implement it, and then after the feature is implemented, if then refactoring makes sense, we can do an entirely separate project to do some refactoring work. So to prevent this scope expansion, there's one more step where we launch another subagent with a fresh context, and this subagent is the judge. And it takes the review that the reviewer produced, and it judges each issue that the reviewer identified. And the judge's role is to make sure that this doesn't expand the scope, and that the items are not simple nitpicks or stylistic changes, that they're actually meaningful items that should be fixed before moving on to the next story. So then the orchestrator will get that judge's output, and if there are no review items left to change, it considers the story complete, and it moves on to the next one and does the same loop. If the judge approved items to be fixed, then the orchestrator relaunches the developer on the same story and says, here are some more items to fix. You're not done with story 1, and the loop continues. So I just want to make sure that that happened with this, because sometimes the orchestrator loses track of what it's trying to do. It doesn't understand that its role is to continue that loop. I've also seen it where the judge returned back items that were approved to be fixed, and the LLM just sees approved and moves on to the next story instead of, no, no, no. The review items were approved. Those review items actually need to be fixed. That's something that if it happens again, then I'll go back into my documents that explain to the LLMs how to do this, and I'll change the wording. It won't be approved for revision. It will be something else that's less likely to cause the LLM to proceed to the next story. So we're going to go look at its output. Oh, it did say that stories 4, 5, and 6 were developed in parallel. In my planning phase, when I write the plans out, it figures out what things can be implemented in parallel by figuring out, what files or portions of the code are going to be modified by each story. And if there are changes that are completely separate from each other, then they can be developed in parallel. So 4, 5, and 6 were developed in parallel after 3. So we're going to look at 4, 5, and 6, and then we're going to go back and look at 3, then 2, then 1. So here it ran 3 judges, and all 3 judges accepted the code as is. And it says all the findings from the reviewer were rejected and acceptance criteria are met. 5 says acceptance criteria are met. Minor type issues are acceptable. And story 6 accepted all findings. It said all findings were rejected or they were minor and the acceptance criteria are met. So the final judge loop actually did happen. And that also says that it went through a reviewer. It doesn't go to the judge until it goes through the reviewer. So I trust 4, 5, and 6 were done correctly. So I want to go back to 3. Here's 3. The judge approved as is, which means no revisions are necessary. So it marked story 3 as complete. In story 3, the reviewer did not like this cast to any for a session ID, but I think that's there specifically because this is a plugin, and I don't know. I might go back and look at that. It might be just normal because this is a plugin and you don't want to rely on files that are in OpenCode. You want the plugin to be its own standalone thing. There might be ways to fix this, or it might just be best to accept this as something worth looking at in a bit. Here's phase 2 reviewer and phase 3 judge launching both, since the fixes are minimal and the reviewer found 0 issues last time for story 2's iteration 2. Is that the same? Here's one where the judge sent something back to the developer. It approved one of the review items for the developer. Judge approved 2 items actually. Must fix session ID instead of extracting from messages. Should fix add a comment explaining the reverse index splice. Nice, okay. That was what the judge says. Here's what the reviewer said that the judge actually judged. There were 3 critical issues, 2 high issues, 1 medium issue, and 2 low issues. And the judge only approved 2 of those items. Interesting. So I am going to ask what happened on this loop here. the orchestrator is going to have the reviewer and the judge feedback about this in its context. So I'm going to ask about that. Did I copy that? I want to make sure I got that. Oh, and here is where we ended the last stream. So on the previous stream, it had already gone through story 1 and story 2, and then I realized I need to switch the reviewer and the judge to use Opus 4.6 instead of Sonnet 4.6. I do still want to take a peek at this because I didn't look at what had happened before it switched over. Story 3 confirmed with all files. Now phase 2 reviewer smart agent. Okay, so it's launching the reviewer for story 3. That's where it got interrupted. And then it continued. Phase 2 reviewer for story 3. Okay, good. Implement story 3. It's doing that. Okay, makes sense. Okay. Judge verdict approved story 2 as complete. Okay, let's see what the reviewer said. The reviewer said there were 0 issues on story 2. Great, I don't even need to look into that one. It looks like maybe there was the first review might have gone through a revision. Yep. The first iteration of story 2 had reviewer findings that were approved by the judge. And so it started a second iteration for developing story 2. And after that second revision, then the next reviewer said there were 0 issues, then the judge approved it, and then it moved on to story 3. So on that story 2, I believe this is what this is. The reviewer found 2 critical issues, 3 high issues, 2 medium issues, and 1 low issue. And the judge says, sending back to developer with approved items only. Okay, must fix missing constants imported in index.ts and should fix the state cleanup for ended sessions, but it rejected the other things. I think I'm going to add something in here that gets the reviewer and judge to build a full report of all of the reviewer's findings and the reason the judge rejected anything, because I do want to go back and review those decisions, even though I usually agree with the judge. I still would like to have more control over that and more visibility into that. Because now what happens is it will finish the story, and if I don't really dig into what's happening, it may or may not actually be what I want implemented. Story 2 developer phase complete. That was the first one. This is the developer subagent. For story 2, that's the first iteration. Okay, here's story 1. Nope, that's still story 2. Oh yeah, and then this happened on stream. So I had to go modify the I had to go create an agent. So I'm using this LLM harness is called Kiro, and recently, within the last month or two, you can't simply launch a subagent with the same permissions as the parent agent. That used to be how it worked, but now if you launch a subagent, that subagent has no permissions. So it was launching subagents. Those subagents couldn't actually do anything. So I had to go specifically configure an agent type that is the developer agent, and the developer had permissions to read and write files and execute bash tools so that it could complete its work. Okay. And story 1 was just initializing the project. There's not going to be a lot that's needed to review there. So I do want to look at this. This was... The approved items, I don't care too much about. The rejected items, I do. These are things that the reviewer found that the judge decided did not need to be fixed. Message format conversion assumes the wrong schema, unsaved cast from metadata. The reviewer said it's critical. The judge said it's not valid. Judge read the code and found it correctly maps output.messages to with parts format with proper fallbacks. Okay, so it's simply saying the reviewer was wrong about this. I think I'm going to launch a new subagent to do a deep dive on this issue. Follower removal, index corruption. Anchor replacement before index collection rejected, not valid. Code correctly collects all indices first, then removes in reverse order. No index corruption possible with this approach. Okay, maybe that one is a well. And then range calculation uses math.min divided by max incorrectly. Logic is sound. Start equals min, end equals max. Handles cases where range end comes before the anchor in this array. This is correct bidirectional handling. Yes, I agree with that. If these are actually invalid things, then I might want to go look at my reviewer instructions and put more in there about making sure these results are grounded in reality. And I might actually have the reviewer agent launch its own subagents to do the deeper diving. I have been working on a different project where I am creating automated reviews, and a big part of that is I call it provenance. So any facts that are stated by any LLM anywhere about the code, about whatever it's producing, I want those facts to be grounded in truth. So it needs to reference where the truth is that this statement is asserting. And then it also tracks the provenance of that truth. Did that truth exist before this project, or does that truth exist because of modifications that were made by an LLM during this project? And it sort of has different amounts of trust that it can grant to those statements depending on the provenance of where that truth came from. And I might bring some of that reviewer into this process, into my development review cycle. Depending on, what the real situation is here with issues like this. L1, hard-coded placeholder ID generation. Rejected is not valid. Identifier.ascending is for generating new message IDs, not part IDs. Current approach is appropriate for placeholder parts. Okay. Interesting. Missing synthetic flag validation in tests. Tests already verify synthetic true is set correctly to additional validation would be over engineering. So synthetic, I'm not sure if that's something normal for the, for instance, Anthropic Messages API or the various APIs that the LLMs use, but I do know in OpenCode, messages are marked as synthetic if they are generated rather than coming from the user. I don't Yeah. If they're generated by the harness code itself. So it's not from the LLM, it's not from the user, but it's something that OpenCode itself generated. And my Context Bonsai features, one of the things that it does is it injects what's called a context gauge that is like a message that's inserted into the context that says, here's how much of the context is currently utilized. It'll say how many tokens are currently used out of how many tokens are available. The tokens is how the context is measured. I said it grows and grows and grows as the conversation proceeds. The context is broken down into individual parts of words. Those parts of words are called tokens, and the actual limit that the LLMs have are token based. So it can have a maximum amount of tokens and a currently used tokens, and dividing them will tell you the percentage of the context that's used. So it injects this information into the conversation, and those messages are synthetic because they're generated by the harness OpenCode itself. So this is another thing where the reviewer said there's a problem here. The judge found that it's not actually a problem. It's not valid. So 5 of the 6 rejected findings were not valid. 1 was just out of scope. The out of scope one was test coverage gaps, missing boundary and overlap tests. So I want to look further into, did I copy it? Yes. Oops. So the developer agent, it's currently configured to use the Sonnet model. And then I have a separate agent configuration that I call Smart Sub Agent that uses Opus 4.6. So I'm asking it to launch a Smart Sub Agent to, actually I want parallel. Whoa, there. Good, insert mode. Okay. So that's going to let me know whether or not that reviewer can be improved or whether the judge needs to be fixed. And if you'd like a deep dive into exactly what this development cycle is, what the orchestrator does, what the reviewer does, what the judge does, that is in one of the live streams. And I will link that below in the description. In the meantime, I should have asked it this first. I want to test this plugin on the commit that this is based on. So this commit, I said I updated it to the most recent, but that update is at this point at least a week old. I think it's possibly 2 weeks old. So I'll have to check out that commit, build this plugin against that commit, and load that somehow. I'm not quite sure how that works when you're running the development version of OpenCode and a development version of the plugin. We'll see how that goes. Okay, so I said, while this is going and I'm waiting on responses from the LLM, I'd start looking at other projects. Here's another project, adding VI editing to Pi. So we did start this on the previous stream. Oops. Oh well. And it went through and stopped at some point. Let's see. Let me go to the very end because I did kick it off again and I'm having it go through the loop as normal. This looks, okay, there it goes. That's what I was looking for. The little throbber says it's thinking. Okay, so let's see what it's in the middle of. something just completed. The development of story 2.1 phase 3 completed. It completed its iteration 4, so now it's reviewing it. Okay, it looks like it is proceeding as expected. I want to see. Oh, yeah. I got really irritated with it because remember when I said I've seen it where the judge approved something for revision, and that means it's supposed to go back to the developer. Instead, this thing simply said, let's see. Oh, yeah, there I asked it what's happening. Here we go. Remaining work. Great. Okay. So here's the report that it gave. Okay, so it noticed its own context window usage was getting close to its limits, I suppose. So it left a status report, which is good, but that means it stopped. It just simply stopped rather than continuing its work. Story 1 completed. Story 2 is in progress. Story 2.1 remains pending operator for doubled commands. Key findings. It found these things. Right, so it found that there's a problem. And it, okay, let's see. Where does it actually say? Here. So editing commands do not have all the tests passing. And I'm not really even sure how it progresses out of the development phase when this happens. The developer is supposed to not allow it to proceed with tests not passing. It's somewhat okay because the reviewer and judge will also make sure that the tests are passing. So it had proceeded to story 2.1 and it says that implementation is correct, but story 1.1 needs to be fixed. Story 2.1's editing commands depend on story 1.1's word motion implementation being correct. And it's asking, should I continue with the next phases of story 2.1 or go back and fix story 1.1? And then I asked for more information about what's wrong with the word motion semantics that it identified. And then it started investigating, which I do not want from an orchestrator. The orchestrator has to keep its context focused on just the orchestration loop. And it's specifically told you're not supposed to do development work. Everything you do should be launching subagents. But it didn't follow that. It started running some tests. And then I said, don't do that. I never want you to directly investigate anything. You're the orchestrator. Furthermore, I didn't ask you to gather additional information. I asked you if there was more information. And here's more information. There was a developer implementation 2 report and the reviewer's analysis. Both documented the issue. But the judge... Here's where it says, the judge approved story 2.1 phase 3 as correctly implemented with a dependency note. This issue belongs to story 1.1 and needs to be fixed by correcting that. And then I asked if there's a failing test, how did it progress beyond the developer review judge loop? You're correct to question this. And it says the judge 3 approved phase 3 with approved for revision. And that's the language I talked about before, where approved for revision means that the reviewer found issues. Some of those issues approved, like the issue itself is approved, and the revision needs to carry forward. And the orchestrator should understand that that means it needs to relaunch the developer and say, these issues still need to be worked on. Instead, it thinks the judge actually approved phase 3, which it did not. And then that's when I got pretty irritated because the instructions are pretty clear that approved for revision means you go back and it said it misunderstood. So this is what I meant when I said, if I see that happening again, I'm going to go back to those documents and change the wording. So it doesn't say approved for revision anymore. It will say revision needed or something like that. And since then, it's been continuing. Oh, it's not showing the thinker again. There it goes. Okay. So this is just in progress. Not too much to look at here. It's going through the various phases of the story. In this project, it's adding modal editing to Pi. It's a different LLM harness, like Hero is an LLM harness. OpenCode is an LLM harness. Pi is its own LLM harness. It's a particularly interesting one. It's very minimal, and it's intended to be customized to your own needs. It's developer friendly, and it's made for you to actually make it be the thing that you want it to be, which sounds perfect for my Context Bonsai work. So I'm playing around with making modifications to it. I'm going to see, if this works, and what kinds of things changed, what modifications got made. And I'm going to sort of dig into the code base and just understand how things are structured in there. Okay. There. So since this is still going, I'm going to go back to this. There was something. Oh, yeah. So I do now want to play in OpenCode with my Context Bonsai feature, and I want to do an actual project and see the LLM spontaneously edit its own context. That's a big part of why I made these tools available to the LLM rather than just commands that you would run as a developer. I want the LLM to be aware of its context usage, which is why those context gauges are inserted. And I want it to remove things that are no longer useful to the task at hand. So I'm going to leave this little test in here and switch to an entirely different task. And I'm hoping that the LLM eventually, once we get working on this task, it will realize that this is completely different, has nothing to do with this little experiment that we ran. Let's maybe work on, I started another project that I never really continued. I'm going to take a look at something. Oh, let's see. I know there's a little GitHub repository with probably nothing in it. Image to maze, that's what I called it. So the idea behind this project is you get an image and it will create a maze that is like the maze looks the way the image looks. Let's see, is that here? No. So I'm gonna clone this repository. There's very, very little here. I wonder if I started this on... Wait, get branch. Maybe there's a branch. Nope, no other branches. Yeah, I may have started this in an online Claude session, and if that's the case, then it may simply not have pushed any branches up. So I'm going to go look for that. Because I did have a chat with it, and I chatted with it about various ways to accomplish this goal. So we'll see if that's over there. That would be in the code section. Search maze. Nothing. Maybe just a regular Claude chat is what I started chatting with. No, not that either. Maybe it's in ChatGPT. Search maze. Yes. Great, and I had it make a nice context document, so I'm gonna just paste that in here. Okay. First, let's have the LLM review this. So let's get this path, go over here, and put that in there. Yep, you're allowed to read that. So I'm asking if there's any gaps in this document, things we haven't covered that are needed to implement this. It captures the core vision, start from a Hamiltonian backbone, a space-filling curve, and perturb it to encode an image while exposing difficulty knobs. It reads like an early conceptual design rather than an implementation plan. Yes, that's exactly what it is. It clearly defines terminology and desired patterns, perfect maze, backbone families, difficulty metrics, so the high-level goals and vocabulary are solid. Gaps to address: pipeline clarity, no step-by-step flow from input image to grid mapping, backbone selection. Okay, great. So now I'm going to have it read my planning guidance document, and this helps it develop a plan the way I like to work with plans. It also has instructions on how to go about resolving any ambiguities in the plan. It has a description of what I call a user gamut and a user needs gamut. Yes, you can read. So that path was here, and that is the project root. Okay, so this will be interesting because I don't usually start from such a general place. Usually when I get to that phase that this document is in, I still continue to have chats with the LLM about this. Okay, proposed approach for building the planning doc, synthesize goals and constraints, reread that document, the image to maze context. Define deliverables and milestones. Yes. Detail implementation strategy. So for each phase, outline the inputs and algorithms. Yes. Then author the plan docs, then validate with a sub-agent, then report the next steps. Okay, so I'm making a plan to make the plan because it's such a general document. It might take a while to get through all of these steps of creating the plan. So back to one of the things this does, oh, it's not continuing. Preparing user note, tracking doc added at tracking.md, pointing to the project route, planning guidance, and context file so we can easily resume later. What's the full path to that? I suspect it created it in this Context Bonsai plugin folder rather than in the right place. Oh, it created it in the right place. Fantastic. There, no more phone dings. So, yeah, it can proceed. All right, the user gamut and the user needs gamut. I've gone over these concepts in previous streams as well, but to catch you up, this is the way I get the LLM to understand what I'm trying to build and not make incorrect assumptions. So one of the biggest things when you're doing vibe coding or LLM assisted coding or context engineering, all of these things of creating code using an LLM's help. Yes, you can read that. I thought I already gave it permission, but one of the things that happens if you're not careful is that the LLM will take your generic sort of underspecified information of what you said you want, and there will be lots of gaps in there. There will be multiple ways of satisfying what you've said, and it will just not even, it'll basically put its own first guesses of, I could do this way and proceed that way without even much thought behind it sometimes. Yes, you can read that as well. Except always. This is asking so many permissions because I'm running it. The project is in a different directory than the directory I'm in. So it has to continually ask permission about doing things in a completely separate directory. I'm kind of doing this on purpose because I started with this demo that I am hoping it will realize that it can edit out itself. It can remove that that sort of test that we did for the Context Bonsai stuff because it's not relevant for whatever we're doing. Okay, so it's found some gaps, listing missing specifics per milestone that could block an independent developer, such as a CLI. Such as CLI inputs for milestone A, image normalization and branch toggling parameters for B, metric balancing algorithm details for C, rendering style specs for D, and solver packaging info for E. I've checked for contradictions with context but found none, and I'll reference the exact plan and context lines while proposing clarifications to help fill these gaps. Okay. So back to this user gamut, user needs gamut. Users, there are very many different types of users of whatever output you're producing. For example, if you're producing maybe an image editing tool, you might have types of users that are novice graphic designers all the way to expert graphic designers, and that's sort of one dimension that a user could be on in a specific occupation. Graphic designer dimension. Now, there may be all kinds of occupations that need an image editor, such as an office worker that's trying to produce graphics for a PowerPoint show, or a textbook writer that needs to produce educational illustrations. So there are very many different occupations. That's another dimension. And within each occupation, they have these different needs. Like some graphic designers might have a need for a vector-based illustration tool, and at other times they might have a need for a raster-based image editing tool. Or some might want some other, there might be a different role, such as a magazine layout person that would need a different kind of tool. So the various kinds of users exist sort of within a multi-dimensional space. There are many different kinds of users with many different kinds of, I guess, expert levels is one dimension, or kinds of output that they need produced is another dimension. There are very many dimensions, and it makes a multi-dimensional space. This kind of space is called a gamut. And within this multi-dimensional space, there are going to be regions that are highly likely where you're going to have users. So there are certain types of users, and there will be localities in there that you're likely to find users of whatever your output is. And then separately from that, all of these users, they have different needs. They need something different from whatever your output is. And again, those needs exist in a multidimensional space. So there are also probably some localized regions where many users have needs that overlap and need the same thing. So there's this description in the project planning document that explains this, and that causes the LLM to think sort of more broadly, not just about what you're asking it to build, but about why you're asking it to build it, what people are likely to want out of the thing that's being built. And this influences its assumptions. Rather than simply trying to find the fastest route to produce whatever you literally said, it takes a step back and thinks about what are people actually needing out of this tool. So that's one of the things that this that this planning guidance document tries to accomplish, is to get the LLM not just to make a first guess, but to make a smart guess that's actually useful. It also says you should consider alternatives. You should consider whether you can do some research to answer questions that you came up with. If there's ambiguities, for instance, about if it's working in a code base, what kind of tests should it write? Well, it can just do research and look at the code base and see what kind of tests there are, what test frameworks are in use, and can decide that itself. It doesn't need to surface that question to me, because I'll just do the same thing, but less efficiently. It will take time for it to tell me the question it has, and then for me to go dig into the code and look myself and then report back the result. Instead, it can just take care of it without bothering me. And that way my focus can be on some other project that's needing my attention at the time. So let's take a look through what it's saying here. Oh yes, let's give it permission to do this. Not sure what's happening. Can it? Oh, no, yeah, I'm on the right thing. It is responsive. Oh, there it goes. Okay, great. The plan document has been updated to address earlier gaps. Reread that and confirm whether it now includes enough detail. Okay, let's maybe... Oh, stop. Take a look at this. And I do want to see some of the things it said. Branch toggling lacks concrete rules. Okay, for converting grayscale values to branch length placement. Reproducing the obvious image imprint is guesswork. Okay, I might come up with a framework for it to tune these values, because it can take an image and produce a maze out of it, and then it can just launch some agent that has vision capabilities and say, look at these two. Does it look like one is a maze that's created from the other image? Does the maze look like that image even without knowing that image is there? Or I might produce some simple images like a tree, a house, a spaceship, and have it generate mazes, and then feed just the mazes to an LLM and ask the LLM what it thinks this maze looks like, and it can say what it thinks. And then I can vary levels of grayscale or color to see if it needs to be tuned. Milestone C introduces a configuration object and an iterative metric balancing loop, but gives no schema for the config, acceptable tolerances, or which algorithm to use. Context doc stresses metric coupling, so lack of formulas or constraints blocks implementation. Okay. Milestone D promises textured rendering and theme presets, yet provides no spec for stroke modulation parameters, shading model, or how overlays combine with the maze, making it impossible to know when the milestone is complete. Yeah, so LLM milestones definitely need concrete acceptance criteria. And without those, you kind of get unpredictable results, and it's identifying that can happen here. This project is itself, it's hard to define a concrete outcome. It'll probably end up coming down to my own judgment in the end, but I'm going to get the LLM to do as much as possible. Milestone E requires a solver and packaging, but omits which solver characteristics must be met, BFS with A-star heuristic, required difficulty metrics, and what documentation or config templates look like, so deliverables can't be validated consistently. Okay, so it's going to define the CLI interface, specify image normalization pipeline, the scaling rules, the threshold formula, the mapping from pixel intensity to branch depth and length for milestone B. It's going to provide a configuration schema and metric formulas, target tolerances, and the chosen balancing algorithm for milestone C. It's going to document the rendering aesthetic, stroke width range, shading algorithm, legend contents, and how the theme presets map to concrete parameters for milestone D. Then detail the solver requirements, the algorithm, the metrics reported, the pass-fail conditions, and enumerate the artifacts that the packaged CLI must include for milestone E. With these additions, an independent developer could implement each milestone without making critical assumptions. This part is exactly what this planning phase is for. So we want to decide everything critical, everything that will have significant impact in the final result. We want to define that in the planning stage. We don't want the LLM developer to go off making decisions because the developer doesn't have information about how to make those decisions. The planning document does. The planning phase is for making those decisions. In addition, the planning phase is when it has my attention. Once we get through planning, it goes through that loop that I described where it proceeds through stories and epics, and it does everything on its own. And ideally, I never have to interact with it when it's going through that loop. I simply look at the final output. I scan through the process it went through, and I look for those places where it made choices that I might care about, and then I look at it. But I don't really want to be bothered while it's developing, primarily because I don't want any big decisions or meaningfully impactful ambiguity to be available for something to get messed up in that phase. I want to resolve all of that during the planning phase. So yes, I want the developer to complete things without having to make critical assumptions. And it says it's been updated. Yep, and I said it would be good to review that. Searching for dead max. Permission required. Recheck for missing details. Oh yeah. So now it's validating its own plan and looking for additional missing details. Because after it modifies the plan, sometimes there's ambiguities embedded in the things that it modified. Also, the first scan through looking for ambiguities may be incomplete. There may be things that it missed that a second review will find. So it goes through this planning document, or this planning guidance defines loops that it goes through to validate its own output. Plan now covers the earlier gaps. Milestone B explicitly defines edge strength using Sobel magnitude normalization and supplies concrete defaults for deadmax. Oh, this is all within a subagent. We're looking inside of a subagent right now. It switched over to the subagent because it had a permission check. It was asking me whether it had permission to modify certain files in that directory. So this was actually, this entire thing was probably the validation part of the loop. So now I can go back to the parent. Control X. Oh, do I have focus? Control X left. It's not flipping through the other subagents. So I do sometimes find that OpenCode becomes kind of unresponsive. Yeah, I can't even type in the input box here. I'm gonna go check on the other projects and then come back here, and maybe it will be responsive at that time. It does seem to be weird. It does sometimes sort of get hung and eventually respond to my keystrokes. I'm not sure what's happening there. It might even be a problem with the additions, the modifications that I made to it, but I don't think so, because those all have an effect sort of when the tool calls happen, not so much when other stuff is happening. Okay, let's go back to here. Oh yes, so I asked it to launch 2 parallel subagents to look at where the reviewer and the judge had some disagreement. And here it says the reviewer was correct for C2, the message format conversion unsafe. Interesting. I've never seen the judge be fully wrong about something like that. And on this one, it says the judge was correct. Message format conversion unsafe cast. Reviewer was correct. This one is more nuanced. The investigator found the OpenCode AI plugin message type has no metadata field in its type definitions. It should. That is something that we added for... It's one of the core changes that we made to OpenCode. In order to mark those messages as archived so that they don't show up when we send them to the LLM, it needs to have some metadata on there for our plugin to add its own attributes to the messages. So one of the core changes to OpenCode was we added the metadata field to the message type, and it found that now our plugin doesn't have that metadata field. That may be because the plugin document was based off of the original unmodified OpenCode, and then we modified OpenCode to add the minimum needed things. But I'm not sure. It should have made the plugin plan with a metadata field. Oh, actually, yeah, the planning was fine. So the plan says to have a metadata field, but the actual implementer didn't add a metadata field, I think is what's going on. The conversion uses message info as any.metadata, a blind cast into any to access the field, a field the types don't guarantee exists. The or fallback prevents immediate crashes, but the real problem is that the tests completely bypass this conversion path. The test fixture creates with parts objects directly with metadata baked in, so the actual plugin framework to with parts mapping is never tested. If the runtime message shape ever changes, this would silently fail. The story context itself acknowledges this gap. It explicitly mentions draft as any metadata as a known temporary type gap until the SDK is regenerated. Oh, yeah. Okay. So it should not have had that in the story because we did implement the changes in OpenCode, and that should cause the SDK to be regenerated. The metadata field does exist at runtime. It was added in the phase 1 upstream changes. The types just haven't caught up. Net assessment. The judge was too dismissive, but the reviewer overstated the severity. It's a real type safety gap with a pragmatic workaround, and the bigger concern is that the tests don't exercise the real conversion path. Okay. We're currently at 74.1% used. I'm going to have it generate a report of this. Okay, so because our context window is nearly full, I need to get the information into a document so that we can survive a compaction event. This is not OpenCode, so I can't selectively remove parts of context. We're either going to have to clear everything out or run compact, and it's going to miss a lot of the details. Okay. So yeah, I've just asked it to write this to a file, and I also reminded that the LLM that's going to be processing this will not have context, but will have access to the planning documents and the code. So a lot of times when you ask an LLM to like write a document like this for someone else to consume, the document assumes that you know things that it knows. Which is not going to be the case, especially with LLMs, frequently also not even with humans. Whatever document is produced needs to have enough information for whoever's consuming it to piece together the same knowledge that the LLM has. And the LLM, its first attempt at writing, or if you just ask it to write a document without considering that the person consuming it has zero knowledge, it will definitely create documents that it assumes you know more than you do about whatever it's writing. Launch a smart sub-agent and ask it if it has any questions that need to be filled in that it can't find itself in the code. Oh yeah, I'm remembering another reason I should avoid talking and typing at the same time is that the noise filter will block out keyboard typing, but if I talk and type at the same time, it sounds weird on the recording. So sorry if that sounded odd or if it was unintelligible. That's not what I told it to do, Guy. It's telling it to continue the investigation. Fine, I guess that's fine. Now that the document is created, if the session is compacted, we at least have something to go forward on, even if the document is missing stuff. We can repiece things together if we have to. It's just more work that will have to get done, potentially. Okay, so that's where that project is at. Let's check on the VI key bindings project. Oops. Okay. Is this the right? Oh, here it is. Okay. This is the Kiro instance that keeps on not showing me the thinking thread. There we go. That's so weird. It's only happening in this one. I have not seen it happen other places. Phase 4 is complete, but missing mismatch tests. Let me update the state and launch a developer to add those tests. Okay. Okay, well, that's continuing now that I've poked it. There it goes again. It's not showing me the thinker. Okay, oh, this one completed. No blockers. The agent confirmed it has everything it needs. Great. It can already see from prune.ts that the anchor always precedes range end. C2 fixes it understands. 3, no questions. All files are present. Instructions are clear. I'm going to now purposely do a compaction. Okay, that actually does take a while sometimes. Okay, plan now covers earlier gaps. Oh, yeah. And it was unresponsive and still is unresponsive. So I'm going to quit this somehow. I can't even Control C. Control Z, that works. There, and then I can do the continue thing. There. Yes, now it's responsive, and maybe I can get back to the parent session now. Control X left. Yay! Okay, so that's where we left off. This was actually the validation agent. And the validation agent concluded that the plan covers the earlier gaps that it had. So go back to the parent. I'm just going through the process that it went through here. Making several updates. Yep. Okay. Yeah, it's doing the stuff where it is launching subagents to do validations. There's the subagent validation. I don't know why it launched another subagent for this confirmation request. I'm not exactly sure. Confirm plan validation task to proceed. I'm not sure why it did that. That's not in its instructions of what it's supposed to do, and I don't know what it was thinking when it did that. Planning iterative document updates, adding detailed milestone specifications, and then that's where we saw it actually updated all of those docs. And then it's doing the validation again. Updating to-do statuses. Preparing final summary, considering reading tracking file lines. The tracking document that I asked it to create. Okay. Summarizing the plan validation, I'll put together final message. And here is its final message. Added a lightweight tracker so that we can quickly regain context later. Authored a full implementation roadmap covering the pipeline, demo-focused milestones, data structures, and risks. Each milestone now specifies CLI contracts, parameter defaults, config schemas, rendering requirements, solver expectations, and success criteria so an implementer knows exactly what to deliver. That's exactly what I'm looking for. I'm surprised that it didn't ask me questions, but in this case, I'm pleased. But I am going to ask whether it really should have surfaced any questions to me. So the planning guidance does encourage it not to ask questions that it can figure out on its own, but it is encouraged to surface things that might have significant impacts that it can't really tell what the best route is. So I'm going to ask it about that. No tough judgment calls here. I never ran into a question where escalation felt ambiguous. The planning and validation process stayed straightforward. Okay, well, great. I'm going to take a peek at this plan. Oops. And it should not be in this directory. Good, it's not. It should be in the home projects image to maze. There we go. Okay, work on discrete grids. Yes, I did specify that. Size selectable but bounded for performance. Backbone must remain a single connected spanning tree before permutations. Permutations must maintain acyclicity. That means it's going to remain a perfect maze. So it means in the maze, there's no way for you to trace a route that loops back on itself. You always will land at a dead end or at the final goal and never end up in a loop. Initial scope excludes loopy mazes. Curved passage rendering. Right, no, I don't want curves. It should be on a grid. Or complex 3D output. Yeah, I don't. That's ridiculous. Prefer pure TypeScript implementation using Bun runtime for CLI and optional UI preview. Pipelines should be deterministic given identical input params for reproducibility. Okay. I don't necessarily need it to be deterministic, but it decided that on its own, and I'm okay with that. System overview, input normalization, makes sense. Grid mapping, yep, makes sense. Backbone construction, build a Hamiltonian path that visits all cells, yep. Store as ordered list and adjacency map. Cool, yeah. Parameterize the curve by curve family to influence local texture. Okay. Image to structure encoding. Slide window along backbone aligning to the mapped pixel values. Interesting. Determine which branch injection sites, foreground, versus smoothing sites, background. Okay. Compute target metrics, junctions, dead ends, nesting depth from the difficulty profile. Cool. All right. Yeah, so the nesting depth means like how many options do you have to go off to a dead end? Like not just how many locations on the main path, but how many times you could nest off and go down to a dead path. The junctions are like the raw count of how many choices there are. And yeah, dead ends is obvious. How many dead ends are there in the maze? For each injection site, carve subtree using depth first search constrained by local metrics and grid availability. Ensure resulting graph remains a tree. Yep. Rebalance if metrics drift from targets via iterative refinement. Sure. Yep. Prune or add branches. That makes sense. Start and end placement and solvability checks. Choose endpoints maximizing distance along the tree or aligning with image extremes. Perfect. That is exactly correct. Run the solver, depth first search, breadth first search to confirm single solution. Collect stats for report. A rendering layer. Convert the tree to a vector representation or a bitmap. Apply textured canvas aesthetic. Vary stroke thickness, shading, plus overlay showing an encoded image for QA. And export metadata. Interesting. Okay. and then the milestones. So in that planning guidance document, it encourages making every single milestone demoable. That way, once it says it completes a milestone, I can actually go and play with it and make sure it's doing what I expect it to do. That's a much quicker validation than inspecting all of the code that it's producing. So milestone A is the backbone prototype. So it emits the backbone with an optional JSON adjacency dump. Okay, cool. SVG spec 1 pix grid background, numbered start end circles, paths rendered as a single polyline with gradient indicating traversal order. Comparison flow. Run the CLI twice, Serpentine and Hilbert, and include a stats.json reporting the runtime, the edge count, and locality store. Okay. Performance acceptance. The LLM loves to put performance acceptance criteria on a lot of the projects. It guesses things that are wildly inaccurate. But here, I think runtime less than a second for a 128 by 128 grid is probably perfectly fine. If it does end up having trouble with that, then I'll expand it. But it likes to have the performance spelled out so that it can write a test for it and have an acceptance criteria. Otherwise, what happens is the reviewer will consistently say, there are no performance guidelines. This could be a performance issue, but then there's nothing for the developer to work against. It's like, okay, there might be a performance issue, but what do you want? What does the performance need to be? So yeah, having a performance acceptance criteria is fine, and this one is okay. Where it gets wildly wrong is if you're producing any product that does LLM calls. LLM calls are extremely slow, and it has no idea what a valid amount of time for an LLM response to be. It's interesting. Milestone B, image mapping MVP, week 2. Week 2, it thinks the milestone one is going to take a week. Extend the CLI with bun run source CLI imprint -- image -- grid -- curve -- threshold gain. It loads an image via sharp / canvas, converts to grayscale, rescales to grid using bilinear sampling, computes an edge strength per cell, applies adaptive threshold, branch toggling rule for each backbone. Okay, constants for this milestone. It decided its own constants for the MVP. That's perfectly fine. It may need to call out that these are temporary milestones for the MVP, or are temporary constants for this MVP. Otherwise, the reviewer might continuously say, this is an issue, it's got these hard-coded constants or these specific values. So I will make note of that. Spawn subtree depth, debug overlay. Yeah, I was actually thinking about that as a way to figure out whether or not the image matches the maze by overlaying the two together and seeing, like, you can compute like the difference between them. I just have a human look at it, have an LLM look at it, and see if they somewhat match each other. Include CSV trace. Original grayscale for QA. Includes CSV trace. Okay. Demo criteria run against the provided samples / torch.png. Interesting. Achieve visible silhouette resulting in maze plus long summary of branch counts. Oh, long summary of branch counts. Okay. Mile C, difficulty controls. Okay. Do the balancing loop, provide an optional balancer flag, reporting, emit metrics.json. Okay, sure. Yep. Milestone D, rendering and style polish. Okay, rendering contract. Convert the maze graph to a layered SVG. Background grid, shadow layer, main stroke with width mapped to local depth. Okay, with theme presets, fine. Start end markers. Okay, so there's going to be concentric rings to mark the beginning and end. I like that. That works for me. CLI flag dash dash theme. Yep, that's fine. QA artifact render report.json, storing stroke stats, color usage, and bounding boxes for overlays so designers can verify textured canvas look. Okay, sure. I didn't really ask for a textured canvas, but fine, fine. Solver requirements, milestone E, validation, and packaging. Okay, use breadth first search to compute the unique path length, verify visited edge count, detect duplicates, run secondary heuristic difficulty estimate. Sure. Fail build if solver detects cycles or disconnected nodes. Okay, this validation is coming kind of late in the process, but I'm okay with that, I think. Stretch, optional bun run dev preview command spins up static web viewer that loads. All right, I do not want like optional things in the plan. The planning guidance is supposed to say there shouldn't be optional things here, so I'm surprised that it added a stretch goal. Implementation strategy. Okay, data structures stored as a 2D array of cells. Okay. Backbone represented as an ordered array of cell coordinates plus an adjacency map. Yep. Branch coordinates, priority queue keyed by image intensity, remaining metric quota, and randomness controlled via seeded PRNG for reproducible mazes. Okay. The various algorithms that are being used. Parallelization opportunities. This is where it's figuring out what parts of this plan can be implemented in parallel. The backbone generation can run in parallel for... Oh, nope, this is actually for the program itself. What can be run in parallel. Interesting. Rendering can operate on a finalized graph independently from the solver or reporting, and future UI CLI separation possible once the core generator is stabilized. Testing and verification, unit tests, property test. Oh, good, I like property tests. And this is actually a perfect example for property tests. So property tests let you not have specifically hard-coded test data. So you give it like a fixture of here's some input data, run this function, and the output data needs to be this. Instead, it defines properties that should hold true given many different kinds of input data, and then it usually will dynamically generate very many different inputs to run through the same test and make sure all of the properties hold at the end of that test. That is perfect for this kind of project, so I'm glad that it included that. Snapshot test for SVG output under fixed seeds. Oh, sure, to make sure that the same seed generates the same output. Golden sample rules, small set of images with expected metric ranges stored in fixtures. Yep, that's fine, I think. Risks and open questions. Ensuring branch injection does not break Hamiltonian coverage. Need robust validation and rollback logic. Oh, it does have open questions. Okay. Ensuring branch injection does not break Hamiltonian coverage. Need robust validation and rollback logic. Okay. Performance on large grids may require optimization or chunked processing. I'll deal with that later. Visual clarity. Encoded image might be too subtle, may need adaptive contrast. Yeah. That's fine. We can address sort of the broad range that images can be by later on adding a UI on top of this and having it be interactive. So you have your image and your generated map, and you can mess with the image contrast and brightness and various other aspects to get the image to actually look like the picture. But to start with, we can have pretty simple pictures and make sure that the image, or that the map looks like the image. Automated difficulty estimation beyond structural metrics. Not yet defined. Okay, fine. UI UX for configuration not specified. Initial focus remains CLI. I'm going to highlight these. It told me that there were no questions left that it needed to escalate, yet it left questions in here, which is surprising. Yeah, the initial focus should just be the CLI. Next steps, implement milestone A, prepare fixture images, and schedule subagent validation of this plan doc once the set is complete. I want to do the fixture images before we start any development. I don't want to implement anything until we have a set of images to start with. But the actual tests can be part of the implementation. Schedule subagent validation of this plan once the doc set is complete per planning guidance. Okay. Yes, it is supposed to go through a validation step. Internal engineering risk, not escalation candidates. I captured them so that whoever implements the milestones knows what to watch for, but none require a user decision right now. Wait, what was... Let me get that back. What were the items? I thought there was something... How much context are we at? It claims 9%. That's surprising. Right here it says we're 9% used on our context. I thought I would have a list of the developer documents. So there's the development loop that this goes through with the orchestrator, developer, reviewer, and judge. I wanted to understand the process that this is going to go through, because if there's questions like this, it will likely land on the reviewer surfacing some of these questions and kind of wasting time dealing with this stuff. So I want things spelled out ahead of time. Actually, I'll not have it read the documents. yeah, let's start with that for now. I want to get the path to these documents. Why is this not completing? Oh, that's why. Actually, I think I want to read all of these. Not all of them. This one, this one, this one, this one. You must read the file before overwriting it. Okay, so it tried to modify that file. Okay. Okay, let's go ahead and have it read. No, I'm not going to have it read those documents. I still think... I will have it read the orchestrator one. Ooh, the next time it pauses, I'm going to ask if it knows the secret word. It should know the secret word because in that original test, it did retrieve it back from the archive. Okay, while this is happening, I'm going to check in on the other projects. What was this? Oh, right, we compacted, and then what were we in the middle of? Oh, right, the questions document, or the unresolved differences between the reviewer and the judge. So, where did it create this document? This. Oh, it actually, oh, right, it did one. Was there only one document? Only for story 3? Story 3 rejected findings report. Were there others? No, just that one. Okay, so now it's going to continue the investigation for the other issues. Theoretically. Integrated the LLM only orchestration model directly. That's not what I asked for, guy. Okay, it doesn't look like it literally integrated the orchestration thing. Good, because that's not what I wanted. Inserting new section after references. Oh, it did kind of. Every milestone needs to be decomposed into stories with deterministic acceptance checks, blah, blah, blah. Developer diffs. Agents will implement per story requirements. Reviewer and judge will enforce the quality gates. This is really still not understanding what I want out of it. What did I literally say? Maybe I can go like, no. Man, I wish it was easier to jump between my own messages. I just want to see my previous message. Usually, hold on, let me see if I stop. Oh yeah, this doesn't support Vim key bindings. Okay, delete everything and up. There we go. Reconsider the entire plan as though the LLMs will be carrying. Okay. Okay, let's see if it understands now. So I don't want it to take the orchestrator document and embed it into here in the way that the orchestration is supposed to run. I want it to understand that the process that's happening is an automated LLM process, and LLMs are going to be following all of these instructions, and here's the process it goes through. The orchestration describes the entire process. I want it to make the plan work in such a way that LLMs can complete it. It has written it as though a human development team is going to implement it, and that's not what I'm looking for. Yep. Undefined artifacts, command context drift, story scoping with multiple concerns, reviewer expectations. The plan doesn't state what reviewers should check beyond acceptance commands succeed. Yes, yeah, right. That's what I'm saying, guy. How to adjust the plan, enumerate the prerequisite artifacts, fix your snapshot, define command contracts, refine stories. Yeah. Yes, and there should be reviewer and judge guidance. That definitely does help. Now I'm going to have it reread the planning guidance. Yes, you can read. Okay. Oh, I forgot to ask if it knows the secret word. So that's proceeding. Let's go back to the Context Bonsai guy. H1 verdict, reviewer was correct, judge was wrong. Yes, obviously, update the file. Okay, so they're all complete. The actual fix work for C2 and H1 needs to happen. So I'm going to have it use that same planning guidance document to create a new epic for fixing these issues. Okay, so now this guy's going through that planning document, that planning guidance process, where it creates these new plans that the LLM can follow, and it validates the plans using subagents, and it will sort of bounce back and forth until the subagent says there's not any ambiguity left and everything is congruent and matches the actual plan. Okay, and our image to maze guy is off to the races doing its planning. Now the VI mode stuff. Again, it's doing the thing where, okay, there's the thinking. Why does it want the password? For some random thing? That's a little scary. Okay, it's just launched the reviewer for Story 2.1 Phase 4. This is going very slowly because the thing keeps apparently stopping and waiting for some kind of input. It's hard to tell. I don't know if the input... I don't know if the subagent is waiting on some kind of input. It does invoke the subagent, and then it kind of stops right around there without proceeding. And then if I hit some keys, then I get this completed thing and this thinking thing. So it's hard to tell what actually is going on there. This seems to be a problem with Kiro itself. But it's proceeding now. Now it's doing phase 5. Where it's going to get the judge to provide an evaluation of the review. And was that everything we're working on? Oh, I was going to play around with pi, but it's late in the stream for starting that. In fact, it's a good time to end the stream. We've been going for quite a while now. Things are in progress, and all of these things are going to take a bit of time to complete. So I think it's a great time to end the stream. Thanks for joining me. Let's see.